No matter what, you have to be close to your customers and you have to deeply understand how they work, how they operate, how they think, all those different things. But then it's up to you as a product manager, and this is where that lens comes in, to really think about how do we use technology? How do we use our available resources? How do we use our knowledge inside this company to create solutions that far surpass what people think are possible?
Hi, and welcome to the June podcast. I'm your host, Enzo, co-founder at June. In this show, I'm talking to the most inspiring product and growth leaders out there who will share their tips on how to launch and grow your SaaS. No fuss, no BS. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Hi, Melissa, and welcome to the podcast. How are things?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks. I'm really excited to have you here. I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation. I've been following your journey for a while, read your books, saw you at the conference you did in France, in Paris last year, and really wanted to follow up with a chat with you. So really excited to have you here.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So I'll do a short intro about yourself so people can have a context. Your name is Melissa Perri. You are a world-renowned expert in product management. What does it mean? You have 3 companies, the Product Institute, the Produx Labs, and the CPO Accelerator. And what you do is you're pushing the boundaries of product management education. You're also a consultant. You advise Fortune 500 companies like Capital One, Vanguard, and Walmart. I'm really excited to see also the differences between, these large companies and the startups maybe you're working with. You specialize in helping these large companies, especially in hiring the CPO, defining the company visions, the product strategies, structuring the product organization, and all of that with the purpose of making them grow, obviously. You're also a board member and an advisor for a couple of startups. I don't know how you find the time to do all of that. And prior to that, you worked in product management, how surprising, at companies like General Assembly, Barclays, and OpenSky. So again, welcome, Melissa. I wanted to crack on with a few questions about the consulting and what you learn as a consultant, because I think it's a very fascinating world that a lot of PM don't get the chance to see. What are some of the most common challenges you're seeing in product management when you jump and try to help companies? And I'm very curious also to see if there is a contrast between, these larger groups and maybe the early stage startups you work with.
Yeah, there's a big difference, I think, between the larger companies and the smaller companies that I've worked with in the past. I love consulting because for me, I've got to see so many different companies, witness all different types of problems with product management, and really be able to apply that to many different use cases, which is cool. And, with the consulting that I've done, some of it's been extremely hands-on, where I've been the interim product leader and I run it and help transform it. Other ones, I come in and I help executives who are in the product leader role try to understand what product management is and how to set it up. And in other cases, it could be extremely tactical, where I'm actually defining the product strategy with them, giving them the tools to actually implement it. Or it could be more training and advising and coaching. So everything that I've done has been a little bit different in each place. But with the larger companies, what's usually happening is there are team members there who are leading some kind of product transformation. And those companies had adopted Agile. They were trying to build better software products. And they got to this point where they started to scale their Scrum practices or other practices that they put into place. And they looked around and they said, hey, we've got a bunch of product owners. What do we do with them? And that's typically where I started to come in. And especially when I first started this, which was back in around 2015, 2016 timeframe, a lot of people were doing Agile transformations. I'd come in, I'd help train the product managers, set them up so that they could be successful, teach them holistic product management, more about what are the right problems to solve? How do we concentrate on problems and not just be like a waiter, order taker person? And from there, a lot of the consulting with the larger companies grew. And it turned more into, okay, now that we know what product managers are supposed to be doing and we've armed them with the tools to do it, how do we create an environment in which they can succeed? So how do we look at product strategy? How do we look at organizational design across our enterprises? How do we also help people understand what product management is or how to work with the business, especially in organizations that were not, let's say, SaaS or software first? So that's kind of what a lot of the enterprise work looked like. And in that, it's a lot of working with executives, working with team members, kind of bridging those gaps and helping people understand what's this new way of building software, right? What's this new way of working? Because it does change the whole context of the company. It's not just about, hey, let's learn better IT practices. It's more about merging the business into the software and coming up with a holistic strategy that's going to see software as a driver of growth and not just as a cost center. So there's a whole mindset shift that goes into play there. And that's typically what the enterprises are dealing with. They're trying to learn how to do better product management, but also how to evolve the way that they run their companies and the way that they think about building software into these new modern methods. With some of the growth stage companies that I work with, it's a different type of problem. They almost always came out of software. There's some kind of SaaS company or a B2B company. And in those companies, what they're doing is they're trying to understand, typically they grew one product line to a great spot and they're trying to figure out how do we continue to grow. A lot of times it's founders who grew that product line and now they're like, hey, let's hire a chief product officer, or I'm taking a step back as a founder, bringing in a different executive team, or I want to merge two companies together and we have to think about what their strategy looks like there. So it's less about training all the product managers. It's more about thinking holistically about what does a great chief product officer look like in those situations? How do we think about growth? And how do we set up this company from small startup to scaling effectively? And that's what I do a lot in the board roles as well. So in those cases, it's more about helping them get a great chief product officer. In the past, I've done interim chief product officer roles. And we used to do that with the team that I did run at Produx Labs, where we'd come in and we'd play that role for a while we were trying to hire somebody to come in and take over. And it was about building the right roadmaps, putting people on the right path, and then educating the executive team about how all this works together and what they'll do with the chief product officer. But a lot about trying to get the right person into it, right? So they can continue with that. And I think that's absolutely critical for scale up companies, is to get the right chief product officer in there and think about how they're going to grow, because that person sets the tone for what the company is going to look like. So in those cases, that consulting, again, really fun because you're seeing all these different use cases. And I've got to see dozens and do dozens and dozens of product strategies, right? And set them off and watch them grow, which has been incredibly fun. And with the smaller companies, what I love about it is that you get to see more happen over time, because it will take less than a year sometimes to, usually a couple months to put this in place and see results, but then a year, maybe 2 years to actually see the outcomes from it. Whereas enterprises, it takes usually a long time to be able to make a significant change where you can look back at it and say, wow, it's completely restructured, because now we're dealing with, 45,000 people instead of 200 people, instead of 300 people. And those types of shifts just take longer. So it's been really interesting to see the gamut across all different companies. And the biggest thing I learned from it is you really have to meet people where they are. And no company is going to be the same. No strategy has been the same. I tend to do the same structure for setting product strategy, but it's not like everybody's strategy comes out the same, which is cool. So you get to see everything in action. And it's like watching a million case studies play out.
That is interesting. You said that you need to meet these companies where they are, but I assume there might be some recurring problems. And one you just touched on is helping them to listen to their customers. If you may, I'd love to double click on this one. And I think it's a good start for a discussion. Is this a common problem for the startups and the larger groups trying to reconnect with their customers, trying to be, very customer centric? Is it a recurring topic, or are not necessarily? And and then I'd love to take it a bit from there. How do you advise them on this topic?
For all size companies, I do think that's a challenge. It's not just limited to enterprise companies. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's the enterprises that don't talk to customers. I've worked with a lot of scale-up companies who are not talking to their customers the way that they should. I think it's really interesting because when you're a startup, if you're not talking to your customers, you usually die pretty quickly because you don't know what they want, right? And you still have a very tight feedback loop the smaller the company is and the earlier you are in product market fit. So usually it's a small team. Maybe the founder is doing sales. Maybe the founder is also leading product. So that person's hearing what they want and they're dictating it back to product. And there's this tight loop. And as they start to scale, usually there's multiple layers. Right now we got a sales team. Now we have a support team. And there's layers between that and product. And we could also have so much on our backlogs once we hit product market fit of what we know that people want. We get into this groove of, okay, just go build it for a while. And we forget to go back and check in on our customers. So it doesn't really matter what size the company is. I've seen people slip back into this not being customer centric part. And I think it's something too where everybody thinks they're customer centric because they are building what people are asking for. But it's a shift in how you do that, right? It's a shift in not just building what they say they want, but really understanding deeply what the problems are. Customer centricity doesn't mean just listening to your customers and building exactly what they're asking for. It's more about really understanding their problems and putting that at the core of the strategy, right? Like focusing on what is our value proposition? Why do they get value out of us, right? Why is our product better for them or could be better for them, right, than all these other ones out there? And deeply understanding that and weaving that into your strategic processes. That's where I think a lot of the customer centricity comes from. But we'll misinterpret that and we'll say, oh no, it's just from like listening to what our customers want, right? Or understanding who our customer is. And it's not quite the same thing. So enterprises suffer from that. Smaller companies suffer from that. I don't think it's a hard and fast rule what size company you are to slip into not being customer centric.
How does a problem look like in practice in a good way? How should it be structured? Who owns that? Who drives the discovery of these problems? Do you share every problems you find? Do you, aggregate things before you do? I think that's one of the hardest things for many companies out there, to try to translate what this exactly means in practice.
Yeah. So one of the things is really deeply understanding who your customer is, and not just from hey, they're X role or they're this. It's understanding like what their daily life looks like. So if you're in a B2B company and let's say you're building things for doctors, like when do doctors see patients? What kind of breaks do they get? What kind of information do they have to write down? What are they thinking about when the patient is like in the room with them? What do they do when the patient leaves? What are they responsible for? What are they being judged for success on? All of those things go into deeply understanding who your customer is. And once you understand that, now we start to dive into, okay, what's the friction, right? What are the problems that they're experiencing that we have the capabilities to solve? Now, problems can come from anywhere. I don't think it's just one person and I won't say it's just the product managers who are discovering these problems. Like we've got user researchers that could be discovering these problems. Support could be discovering these problems. Sales could be discovering these problems. Anybody is welcome to surface up problems, right? That's not something that just belongs to one role, and it can't belong to one role. Otherwise, we're not doing our jobs effectively, and we're going to narrow the field of problems we can consider. I think it's everybody's responsibility in the company that when they hear a problem or observe a problem from a customer, they capture it, understand it, and then translate it back to the rest of the company so people can actually act on it. So in practice, you might have user researchers going out and doing a study and uncovering problems and bringing it back to the product team. The product team might follow up on that. Like product managers might go, hey, let's go deeper into this because this is something we've scoped out where we're actively trying to work on it. Let's go follow up, try to get like a little bit deeper there. Maybe they work with the user researchers to go back and forth. Or it could be sales saying, we've heard 10 times over that mid-market customers really want this. And they might bring it back to the product managers and they say, hey, as a team, let's go figure out why they want that, right? Why is it important? What's going on there? And they might follow up with user research to go in there. Or product managers might be out there doing user research in general, and they find the problems. It doesn't matter where it comes from, right? But it's kind of this flow of deeply understanding what it is. And what I think we need to do is make sure that we're capturing all this information that's coming in so that we know where to look and how to follow up and how to dig deeper into those problems. And it could come through a usability test. It could come through a demo. It could come through a sales call. It could come from a support call. It could come through regular user research. It could come from a bug request, right, that developers are getting. It really could be anywhere that these problems be surfaced. What we need to do is look at the problems and then come back to our product strategy and say, which problems are we prioritizing to solve now to help our company grow, right? And to help our customers achieve value, which does help our company grow. So I look at product strategy and, prioritization as a lens to figure out which problems we want to concentrate on now and which ones we want to concentrate on later.
This is a very healthy process. I think what's so hard for companies, like once you have a role and a job and you have, especially when you're PM or PO and you own some specific features or problem area, it's very hard to zoom out and say, oh, by the way, I don't own that, but it keeps coming back. And maybe this is something we should explore or an information that we should store. It's almost like you're suggesting that every IC contributes to the work of the CPO or the very senior product person right? And do this work collectively, right?
Yeah. And I do think it's collective. I also think there's different tiers, right? As a CPO, if I'm like, let's say I'm the CPO in the company, I'm worried about how do I create a strategy that's going to last us for the next 3 years at a smaller company, let's say, right? Something that's like long term, something that doubles down on what our unique value proposition is, something that really hones in on which customers do we want to solve problems for, which markets do we want to play with, how do we win, how do we grow, right? And I'm concerned about those questions. So I'm looking at the research that people aggregate, and I'm working with ICs to help me aggregate that research in ways that are interesting for that time horizon, right? I'm not worried about a specific workflow, right? I'm not worried about a super narrow use case, right? I'm worried about the broader use cases, the broader jobs to be done across all of our customers. Whereas individual contributors, let's say product managers working on teams with developers and designers and user researchers, right? They're going to be worried about getting information about our customers that might pertain to the specific use case or workflows they're working on. So they're going to also be digesting information that could come from sales, that could come from support or anywhere else, but they're going to be filtering it through in a lens that's relevant for their part of the product. Whereas I would be looking at it from a holistic standpoint, right? Is this observing, like, am I observing from all this research a trend that these things aren't happening the way that we thought they are, and that might affect my overall product strategy? So I think as a product team, we are consumers, whether you're a CPO or an individual contributor, of information coming from the rest of the company and directly from our customers through our own research and our own ideas. But we have to be aware of what's going on everywhere else, and we have to take that into account too.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Moving on these problems when they're used as a prioritization or not. There is a myth, in startup land that you can be a visionary like Steve Jobs, go in a room and keep secret what you're working on, and one day go on the keynote and release it to the world, and it works. Have you seen situation where aligning too closely with customers may hinder the innovation or limit the company ability? Is it a thing, or is it just like a total myth and it just never works this way?
This is the difference really between a waiter type architect, that's why I call it, an archetype of a product manager that's a waiter, or product management system that's a waiter, let's say that too, versus innovative product management. And what Steve Jobs did well and what Apple did well is they weren't just listening to people ask for things and making them, right? And it's, the iPhone, the iPod never would have came out if people were like, can you make me this little box that looks just like this and I can put music on it, right? Instead, they were observing how people wanted to interact with the world, how they wanted to do things. And they said, how do we make it better with technology? And that's the difference, right? When you're a waiter type product manager or waiter type, I would say this can even just be for a whole organization. You are basically letting the customer solve their own problems. And you're taking solutions directly out of the customer's mouths and you're putting it on the backlog. And that's not driving innovation, right? Because you're only taking what they're saying. You're not looking at, can we do this in more interesting ways? And hey, our customers probably don't have all the context that we do or all the technical chops that we do. How do we design this in a way that could be very different than what people are doing? And that's what they're missing there. So if you were just doing that, you're doing it wrong. But Apple and Steve Jobs still had really deep customer knowledge, right? And really deep empathy and really deep understanding of how humans operated, right? And how they did things. And that's the important part there. But they weren't just listening to solutions. So no matter what, you have to be close to your customers and you have to deeply understand how they work, how they operate, how they think, all those different things. But then it's up to you as a product manager, and this is where that lens comes in, to really think about, how do we use technology? How do we use our available resources? How do we use our knowledge inside this company to create solutions that far surpass what people think are possible? And, great examples of that are, I see this all the time. I see people try to design solutions for themselves without thinking about it from another box. And this happens a lot in the industry. So I work with a lot of banks. I work with a lot of financial services companies, or, one's very, very structured companies, even medicine. And you see product managers sometimes come there from a background where they've worked in financial services or medicine or something like insurance, whatever it is, for the last 25 years. and they've used products that have been built for those companies for the last 25 years, right? And when they go and they design a solution or they think of a solution for those products, they design it in the same way that these have been using. So a lot of times, like, the UX is incredibly hard to use. The solutions are like very straightforward. There's 80,000 steps sometimes. And they're not looking at it as like, hey, there's some consumer products out here, like, Twitter or Stripe or some of these modern things. Even though they're not in our context, we can borrow how they do design or how they approach problems and apply them back to our own problems, right? Apply those patterns back, because it's hard. They get locked into thinking about things in one way. And you'll see that from your customers as well, right? They have such deep industry knowledge that sometimes it's hard to pull back from the industry and start to think about things in unique ways or borrow things from other industries or other practices and apply them back to your own. And that's where I think you get into a danger, both with customers or internally, where if you're not mixing it up and having that diversity of thought or the diversity of experiences and things when you're building the products, you can't look at things in unique ways. And that's what stifles innovation, I believe. It's not that you're close to customers, it's that you're listening to exactly what they're saying and building it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the difference between the theory and the practice, right? When you get into the practice land, you just get the reality hit you in the face. What are some of the limited thought sources? So you mentioned one is the background. So you probably just do the things you've seen or understood before, or that you consider are, good enough solution. Maybe one direction I would like to hint into is the human interactions. You wrote really, really honest piece of information in your book about the role of humans in shaping these products. And there is one paragraph I would like to read, which I think is like very honest. And I pretty much one of the most honest things I've read about this topic. You said, I learned about the power of personalities in an organization. People will get in the way of a good product every time, even if it's the best idea for the company. If it doesn't meet the personal agendas, especially of senior stakeholders, it can be squashed. To mitigate that risk, you need to deeply understand what motivates people and to know how you can address their personal motivations. Is it the main blocker then, you think, in this organization?
There's so many dynamics from working with people, and we have to take that into account. It's actually one of the biggest reasons too why I see people opt out of product management. I've trained a lot of product managers. I've trained a lot of new product managers, let's say. And there are a lot of people who get into the job and they say, I don't want to do this anymore. And when you find out why, it's about dealing with so many different agendas and so many different personalities. And in some roles, you don't have to do that. But as a product manager, you're like the person in the middle, right? Who has to aggregate all of these things. And I do think it's a very complex job. And it comes down to people dynamics at the end of the day. So I have seen in a lot of places where if you don't understand somebody else's agenda, or you don't understand why somebody's pushing back, or whether a detractor, you can't figure out how to work with them. And I believe it goes for customers, it goes for internal stakeholders, it goes for team members, everything like that. I think the best thing you can do in probably any organization, especially as a product manager, is deeply understand what people's motivations are and why they're doing it. But I have worked at companies where, I'll come in and they say they want a transformation and they want to do product management really well. And I'll tell them what they need to do to get there. And the leader's like, no, don't want to do that. I'm like, okay, well, first of all, why am I here? But second of all, yeah, like, why not? Right? Why not? And it will go back into a misunderstanding of what product management was. So when you explain it, they realize they're going to lose control. And they thought that moving this way would be more of a control play. That's happened a million times. They realize that they don't get to just dictate the solutions and have people build it. Right? They don't realize what's entailed in the actual journey. And when they get into it, it doesn't jive with what they wanted at the end of the day, right? What they want from their career or from what their priorities are either. Maybe they thought, oh, if I have product management, it makes everything develop faster. Like we can develop things faster, which it does at the end of the day. Like you can move faster with great product management, but that's not the goal, right? It's not the only goal. Let's put it that way. It also comes with a lot of other things, right? A lot of democratizing decision-making back to product managers, a lot of not dictating down what we're going to build. And some people are not comfortable with that. So that was the biggest thing I learned consulting and working with so many companies as well, is that just because people say one thing doesn't mean they actually want that thing, right? It doesn't mean that's the outcome they're looking for. So no matter what, even when it's working with customers too, they'll come and they'll say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z products. And they'll go really crazy to like put it into the contracts, blah, 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 blah. I want these features. I want that. And when you go back and you really do user research well, and you say, hey, why do you need this? Tell me how you're going to use it. What's the objective? When I put this into practice, what will you be able to achieve that you can't achieve now, right? Like, what does success look like? It may look very, very different than what you thought from that feature request. And that's the same thing internally, right? And that's what I do when I talk about transformations or setting up product orgs as well with executives. I'm like, I do the same exact thing. I say, what is the outcome that you're looking for? Pretend it's 5 years from now, we implemented great product management. What are we doing differently, right? Like, what's working, what's better? How did we change? And sometimes you find out that what they want is different than what they're asking for. And once you align on that goal and that destination, you can work backwards and try to figure out how to get it in there, like how to build all these things in the right way to get it pushed through. But to me, people problems are always the reason why certain things don't work out at the end of the day. And you have to be willing to be flexible for that. I've seen a million cases where we have a fantastic team, we've got a fantastic product, and then you throw one wrench into it, right? One leader that doesn't get it or doesn't want to work with the rest of the people, right? Or who wants to operate in a certain way, and it will kill the morale and it will kill the product usually. And sometimes that product, you don't see it on the outside sometimes because VCs or executives in large companies, like, first of all, when you're a really big company, it takes a long time to fail. I don't think any of these big companies are going to go out of business if they don't do product management right tomorrow, but we're going to see in 10 to 15 years what happens, right? But it's going to be a long time before something crashes. And hopefully within that 10 to 15 years, they turn things around. And I've seen people 5 years ago where I was like, oh God, this is hopeless, make leaps and bounds up to now, which is fantastic. And I'm really, really excited about that. So I think there's a lot more going on in bigger industries right now where people are getting it. It's starting to make sense. I'm very excited about that. Smaller companies, takes a little less time to fail. But also if you're backed by a VC or somebody else, they will financially engineer their way into success to make it look like a success. But that doesn't mean the internal dynamics of the company were a raging success, right? So from the outside, we get really interesting perspectives about what good looks like or what we perceive good to be. But inside companies, it could be a whole number of different issues. It might be going great. It might not be going great, but we have no idea until you actually get in there.
Where is the line between some people have, limited thoughts and sometimes you come to help at the table, and help them change that. This is becoming a problem and just like things needs to change, right? And I think one piece that you also wrote about, which I think is very unique, is like how to evaluate people, product people, and how sometimes it is worth tying people development to their outcome, and how surprising it was for you to do that, right? So how do you find this balance? Also, this topic of incentives in product management is a very touchy one, right? Because you want to make sure that PMs and POs and CPOs and so on work with the right goals in mind, How do you put these things together? Should someone stay and evolve? And where should someone be measured, against the outcome versus not? Like, how do you draw these lines?
Yeah, there's got to be a balance between getting things done and outcomes, right? Outcomes usually can't be measured immediately. So that's the hard part of like judging somebody's success by outcomes. But I do firmly believe that the way you contribute to the product strategy and your ability to get those things done and ushered through should be how you're measured for success as a product manager. It should be hitting goals, but it also should be looking at leading indicators to hit goals. So let's say a product manager is working on this new feature set, right? But we're not going to be able to see if it actually helps retention for another year and a half. There's usually leading indicators that can show us that it's moving towards retention that we should be looking at. But also I want to make sure that they thought through those problems to solve correctly. And sometimes they're not going to increase retention, right? Because it came down to a factor beyond our control. And I think we have to acknowledge that as well. So what I look for in great product managers is, how is your thought process for why you want to go after certain things, right? If this is your initiative and this is what you scoped it out to be, was it logical? Did you like deeply understand the customer? Was it based on good data, right? Did you do a good analysis with what you had, right? And then did you take a bet? Did you scope it down and test it in a way where you got some leading indicators that was the right path to go in, and then you decided to invest, right? Even if that doesn't pan out to one-to-one hit that goal at the end of the day, I still think that's successful. And their ability to react and say, hey, it's not going in the way that we thought, let's counter correct this, or here's things I discovered, or here's things that I learned that tells us we should do this and this instead. That's a good measure for success for a product manager as well. But it's not about the quantity of shipping. And that's where people, always come back to. It's like, how many features did you ship? You do have to ship though, right? And this is where it gets tricky because again, it's a balance of outputs and outcomes. And I think we swung this pendulum when we got into outcomes over outputs. And I do believe it's still outcomes over outputs. Like I much prefer you to ship one feature that hits your goal rather than 20 features that come halfway to it, right? Like it should be about the quality, not the quantity, right? And that's what we're talking about with outcomes over outputs. But you still have to ship something to hit the goal. And that's something that we need to look at as well. Like the ability to get things done and to usher it through is very important. And if you're not shipping or you're swirling and you're not able to get things out, you will never hit a goal, right? So I think it comes back to outcomes over outputs means like a quality thing rather than a quantity thing. But it doesn't make it any less important that you still need to get things done.
Right. So there is some sort of maybe correlation, but yeah, you can't ship if you can't get a good outcome if you don't ship, but it's not because you ship that you get a good outcome, right? So
exactly.
It sounds like a bit like, it's not like rolling the dice. It's a bit more tied up. That makes total sense. The last topic I wanted to move on before we wrap up is the skills that product people have. You have a great map that you shared where basically as product people go through more seniority, they move from having more technical skills to having more strategic skills, right? And in the middle, there is operational skills. So this whole layer of, how you help the teams and the POs, PMs to move together, kind of. Things are changing a lot. Product ops are, becoming trendy. AI, organizations have fired a lot of people too with the recent crisis. They're more flat. Do you see any big change in the way people are going to build their skills? And for maybe, PMs that are listening to us and going through the ladder right now, what are the things that, maybe they look up to that they shouldn't learn again or they should be mindful of?
Yeah. So when I think about the skills thing, the biggest difference between somebody who's set on a right path to become a great product leader one day and somebody who doesn't from an organizational design perspective is many organizations went back and adopted like safe methods where they've got the product owners or product managers on teams. I call everybody a product manager, but let's say the person working with the developers, they've got them doing purely tactical work of like writing stories and feeding it to developers. And you need to introduce a little bit of operational strategic in there. You need a little bit of roadmaps. You need customer discovery. You need to be able to think strategically, all those different things, right? And in a great scenario, you will be set up well for success in an organization as a product manager on a team. Let's say when you're junior, when they scope out smaller projects for you to work on from like a product perspective. So I might give somebody like a piece of a feature set rather than a full feature set when they're junior, but I still let them think strategically about it, understand customer problems, write the metrics around it, do the goals, work with the developers, work with the designers around a smaller scope. And that's what I think we need to do for product managers who are early in their career. It's not about just having them write stories for a product manager. It's about giving them a small scope. And that was done for me when I started as a product manager. Like they just gave me a smaller feature to work on and I got more and more responsibility as I grew. And that was great because I could tackle it, I could grow, but I still needed to be strategic. And I learned in a smaller area. And then I just expanded and expanded until you start to look at the whole portfolio when you become a chief product officer. That's how we need to think about leadership. So if you're a product manager and you're looking at your job and saying, is this set up well for me to succeed and to continue on my path of being a great product manager, look at what the scope is that they gave you. Are they asking you to just be a order taker, user story writer, or are they actually asking you to think strategically about a smaller scope? And you want to find the places that can scope something out small for you to get your feet wet, and then you'll grow from there and you'll keep learning. That's what I think really sets people up well for success early in their careers. And when you look at it too, it's okay if you get into product management as well and think, I don't want to do this. Like this is not the field that I wanted to go into. Because I've worked with a ton of people who have, right? I did a whole transformation at a company with, 350 product managers and we trained them all. got them into the role, had them doing the work, and a bunch of people opted out. I think we had like at least 70 people who said, this is not what I thought it was. And we moved them into other roles. And if you're analytical, product ops could be a great place to go. We had a lot of people move into product operations, and it helped enable the product management team. We had people move into user research because they loved working with the customers. We had people move into other parts of the business as well. And that's fine, right? Like not everybody needs to be a product manager. And honestly, a lot of people I don't think enjoy it when they get into it. It takes like a very certain type of person to like that work. But you're seeing the rise of other functions that do support product management. And you mentioned product ops to me it's a small team. It's not meant to be like this huge team. It's meant to be a small enabling function for the product management team that helps product managers and UX designers and developers and everybody just kind of be able to evaluate the success of their products, to understand and get the right information back to the teams. So all those inputs that we were talking about going to the teams, that can be streamlined through great product operations, right? Like they can help you make sure all the information gets back to the teams. They can help you make sure the data is implemented well so that you can pull those reports and actually see what users are doing in your product. They help set up some lightweight governance so that we can do product management holistically across the organization. And those roles, I believe, are really important. And the reason they're becoming more important and why you're seeing them out there today and being talked about is because product management is finally recognized as like a really important function in organizations. And as organizations grow, we're getting more and more product managers. So we need to make sure that they can spend their time doing great product management. And that's why I think product ops is really important. That's why we wrote the second book on product operations, because it helps product management succeed. And again, I don't think it's a big team, but I do think it goes hand in hand with getting good product management done.
A great and inspiring conclusion. Thank you so much, Melissa. We're at the end. I know we're behind schedule. If people want to follow up, where should they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and follow me there. Melissa Jean Perri is the /Melissa Jean Perri. But just look for Melissa Perri. I'm there. That's usually where I'm posting. And then if you go to melissaperri.com, you can sign up for our newsletter. And we do have a podcast called the Product Thinking Podcast. So if you subscribe to Product Thinking Podcast, you can ask me questions there. I answer them every week as well.
I'll make sure I point to all the references. Yes, I forgot to mention the name of the podcast. Also, the name of the book is Avoiding the Bill Trap. Avoiding the Bill Trap, right?
Escaping the Bill Trap.
Escaping the Bill Trap.
Yep, Escaping the Bill Trap.
Yep. I'll make sure I point to all of that in the description. Thank you so much, Melissa. Have a good one.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the June podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe. This episode is powered by June. For a better way to do product analytics, visit june.so.